Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest Beyond the Headlines. Today, we're examining the mistaken Uber trial that was held here in Columbia during the past week. On a chilly night in March 2019, University of South Carolina senior Samantha Josephson left the Bird Dog bar in Five Points to catch an Uber home. She stood on a corner and waited for a ride. She even tried to enter a car mistakenly. Then a black Impala drove up right after. She got in, but she would not get out alive. Her body was found hours later. She had been stabbed more than 100 times when she was found in that field in Clarendon County, 65 miles away from Columbia. That next evening, police pulled over a black Impala about a half mile from where Samantha disappeared. That traffic stop began an investigation that ended Tuesday with Nathaniel Rowland's murder conviction and his sentence to life in prison without parole. Post Courier Columbia reporter Stephen Fastenau covered this trial for us, and he's going to talk a little bit about what he saw and some impressions he took away from this very, very emotional case. Stephen, thanks for being with us today.
Sure, I'm glad to do it.
And before we get into the questions, I just want to let you know that, first of all, we're going to have our email addresses and Twitter handles here in the Zoom chat that you can get, so you can reach us afterwards if you have any questions or any comments you want to share with us during this time or afterwards. Also, wanted to let you know that you can ask questions. You can submit questions. There's that Q&A button that is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Feel free to send in some questions, and we'll leave some time at the end to answer your questions as well. And again, thank you for everyone for joining us today. Stephen, I think what folks want to really understand, and maybe they didn't follow the trial all the way through, maybe they caught bits and pieces, but what was the key evidence? What were the key moments that probably led to Nathaniel Rowland's conviction?
Sure. Well, there was a lot of it. I think that was something that was obvious and was noted throughout the trial was the word avalanche. Avalanche of evidence was thrown around numerous times. I think it started with his car, right? Once he was pulled over, all the blood that was found in his car, the cell phones found in his car, and Solicitor Byron Gibson noted this: the cell phones were key, and all the data they were able to extract to track the location of Samantha Josephson and Nathaniel Rowland in 5 Points at the same time.
And Stephen, just to stop for a second, you're talking about the idea of Samantha Josephson's phone and Nathaniel Rowland's phone going in the same places.
Correct. So the cell phone data they presented in evidence was that both their phones were in 5 Points in the same general area at the same time. Their phones moved away from 5 Points at the same time after Samantha was seen getting in the car. At some point, Samantha's phone turns off, but they're able to continue tracking Nathaniel Rowland's phone with cell phone towers, out east of Columbia, all the way to the general vicinity of where her body was found in Clarendon County. So the phones were a big part of that, but then you add the other pieces, which is the surveillance video, that kind of pairs with the phones, with the locations from the phones. They go to the video and are able to find, the surveillance video from a bank in Sumter matches the time of when Roland was trying to use her debit card at this ATM, matches the time his phone was also in that area. He tried to use another ATM on Garner's Ferry Road a little while later. His phone's in the area at that time. So every piece seemed to fit together. Every piece fit together as part of this conviction. Then another big aspect of the evidence was the items that were found in the trash at his girlfriend's home. The murder weapon, what prosecutors said was the murder weapon, bloody sheets and clothes, cleaning supplies were all found in her trash. And that DNA evidence from those items was a big part.
And her blood was found, in the car that he was driving when he was pulled over, as well as on these items that were found in the trash at his girlfriend's home, which happened to also be in Clarendon County, where he was from, and not far from where Samantha Josephson's body was found.
Right. Well, the girlfriend's home was in Columbia
Oh,
off of
I'm sorry.
Leesburg.
Sorry
Yeah,
about that.
no, it's off of Leesburg Road, but that's where he, returned. That's where the phones track him returning. Um, his former girlfriend, Maria Howard, testified to the fact that he arrived that morning, the morning after Josephson disappeared, and she noted the amount of blood in the back of his car. He was supposed to pick her up for work to take her to McDonald's, and he was late. Her McDonald's visor was supposed to be in the back window. It was missing, and when she asked about it, he said it was in the country because it had blood on it, is what she testified. It was later found in the trunk of his car, and it did indeed have blood on it. The blood was everywhere throughout the car. It was on his shoe. It was on the girlfriend's daughter's shoes. She testified to taking her daughter to picking her daughter up from daycare in his car because she had to, and then taking her to doctor's care. Well, I guess the doctor's care was later on, but she at some point noticed blood on her 4-year-old daughter's shoes from having ridden in the car.
So we had the evidence. Of course, we had the more of the technology part of it, the cell phones. We had the video of him trying to sell her phone, of him trying to use her ATM cards. We had the blood that existed, of course, in the car that he was driving, even to the point where it was still there when he was helping his girlfriend kind of get her around to things that she needed to do, as well as, of course, all the things that were found in the trash. But there was an argument from the defense that kind of tried to poke a hole in a lot of this. What was it? What was the defense's main argument about all of this that was found, and of course the other DNA that was sort of a part of the investigation?
Sure. Well, first of all, the defense objected to the traffic stop as unlawful. Right. I guess that would be the key to all that evidence. Started with the traffic stop, because one thing I neglected to mention is in Roland's car was a letter from Maria Howard in his glove box. She was trying to evict one of the people who lived with her. So she left a letter in his glove box the previous day, and that's what led investigators to her house, and to her and the evidence in her trash. So they objected to the traffic stop as unlawful. The judge obviously disagreed and said they were within their right. They were looking for a car that matched his description. Beyond that, they did not dispute, obviously, all the blood in her car. They did not attempt to blame Samantha Josephson for anything that happened to her. They pointed out that her DNA was not found. His DNA was not found anywhere on her, not in her nails, not under her nails, not on her body, and that she would have been fighting in that back seat, scratched and clawed, and got his DNA on her. And related to that, that his body had no scratches. He had no no signs that he had been in a struggle. And then to the DNA evidence, the defense noted some unidentified people that had been identified through the DNA and said they were important and that they couldn't be discounted. Part of the issue came down to the handle of the knife, where one test showed likelihood, with weak confidence, they called it, that Nathaniel Rowland's DNA could have been on the handle of the knife. With also the presence of two other males, I believe, on that handle. One being the majority contributor, who it was an unidentified part of that DNA mixture. So they were really just trying to say, yes, there's this bloody car, but you cannot put Nathaniel Rowland in the car that night and murdering Samantha Josephson. They also tried to poke holes in Maria Howard's story a little bit. She seemed to contradict herself at times. She said at one point that the night Josephson went missing, that Roland was asleep on her couch when she went to bed, and then later that he was in her bed and they had been watching TV when she fell asleep. I think during closing arguments, Roland's attorney, all but called, said that Howard had lied when she said she saw Roland cleaning the cleaning the supposed murder weapon in the car. That day, they're driving to her mother's house, I believe, and she sees him with gloves on, cleaning the car, and then holding this multi-tool that was believed to be the murder weapon and cleaning it. Roland's attorney said when the multi-tool was found in the trash, it was covered in blood and had Samantha's hair on it. It did not appear to have been cleaned, and that part of her story seemed to have been fabricated. But ultimately, there's no, for the defense, there's no alternative offer. They didn't offer. They called no witnesses. Roland did not testify. There's no one to speak to an alibi or anything that could have given the jury another option.
And they never pointed to another person or said someone else borrowed the car or anything along those lines. They never outright named anybody or suggested anybody else, or that he had an accomplice in this.
Right. There were some other names that were mentioned throughout the trial, but their relationships were not explained, and there was never an attempt during his defense to suggest that he wasn't the one driving the car.
Just as a reminder for everyone, at the bottom of your screen there on the Zoom, you can submit a question, and we'll take some questions at the end of this. And also a reminder that we are recording this, and we will put this on the Post and Courier website as well as our YouTube page. So if you didn't get a chance to, if you know someone who wanted to see this and didn't get a chance to, you'll be able to. One of the things I think we should just make clear to people, just for those, again, maybe didn't follow this in all the detail, is that when Samantha apparently got into this car, the back doors were locked. The child locks had been activated, so she would have been trapped in the back. And so that's why there was a lot of the concentration of the investigation was on the back seat of this car. The sense that what was Roland kind of like during the trial? What he did some things at the beginning that were kind of, I think, a little bit of a little eye-opening, of course, and then even after he was convicted as well, he and his family did some things I think that were surprising. So talk a little bit about what Roland was like during this proceeding.
Sure. So kind of right out of the gate, we heard from him almost immediately when the judge during jury selection, at one point when the potential jurors were out, the judge called Roland before him and asked him if he was ready for trial. He said that he was ready to move forward, but he thought he was going to be represented by someone else. He had thought one of his family members had retained a private attorney. He was represented by a team of public defenders. Since his arrest, he had been represented by the public defender's office. He said, the chief public defender, Fielding Pringle, had recused herself because of a conflict of interest for a personal relationship that he had. And that in Roland's mind, Roland said he wondered how Pringle could have a conflict of interest that didn't affect the rest of her office. Pringle came before the judge and said it was a personal relationship, and that the public defender who did represent Roland, Tracy Pinnock, did not have the same conflict, that she was capable. Pinnock told the judge she had been with the public defender's office for 13 years, had tried hundreds of cases, 7 or 8 murder cases, and that she had defended Roland to the best of her ability. But she did say there's communication issues during COVID last year, when some stuff was being carried out through Zoom. The bottom line is there's apparently a miscommunication. The family never retained another attorney. And by the end of that day, Roland had told the judge he's satisfied with moving forward with this team of public defenders. So it's a little bit of a wrench thrown into things from the start, but it did not ultimately affect his representation or the timing of the trial. And after his conviction, he was before his sentencing. Judge asked if he wanted to speak. He maintained his innocence and said he had wished the state had done more research to find the actual person responsible, to which the judge responded that he appeared to have no remorse and he was heartless, and that he hoped, being in prison, ultimately he would be able to exercise some demons that he might have. Some pretty strong words from the judge, then Roland's family had an opportunity to speak. Um, his mother attempted to plead his innocence, that she didn't raise her child that way, and the judge shut her down pretty quickly and said he'd been convicted of murder, and she couldn't speak to his innocence. That would have been for trial.
And at that point, they were deciding between 30 years in prison or life. That's when you get convicted of murder. That's the range of the penalties in prison at that point. And he got life without parole. I mean, you talked a little bit, of course, about the idea that the judge said that he felt like Roland didn't have any remorse. What were some other factors that went into the judge's sentencing of life without parole?
I think it seemed like his mind was made up. That the nature of the crime, he said, was among the most horrific he'd seen in his decades on the bench. That one similar stabbing and torture case he had been part of previously was a death penalty case, and that essentially the least he can do is give him life without the opportunity of parole. There's some pretty powerful impact statements from the family that talked. The family members and Josephson's boyfriend talked about how their lives have changed as a result of her death, and it just there was little question that he was, once they got to that phase of the trial, he was getting life without parole.
You mentioned that the judge said the last time he had a stabbing like this, it was a death penalty case. This wasn't a death penalty case. What did you learn about maybe why why they didn't make this a death penalty case, or what were some of the hurdles if it was made a death penalty case?
Sure. So Solicitor Byron Gibson's stated reason was just that they reviewed the facts of the case. This is the decision that was made, and he laid it at his feet. He said it was ultimately his decision. They were comfortable with the decision. Before the trial, I spoke to a couple of former prosecutors, Dick Harpootlian and Todd Rutherford, a couple other people just on background, about why they might not have sought the death penalty in this case. Basically, there could be several factors, but it comes down to a death penalty case would have been a much longer process. Jury selection and everything else would have been a drawn out process. So you're talking about possibility of delayed justice for the family. The cost of continuing to provide Roland or defendant legal representation through all the appeals to the point the person is actually put to death is a timely, costly process. And then I was told Richland County, with a majority Black population, and the possibility of a jury being majority Black, and the Black jurors are less likely to support the death penalty was the reason Mr. Dick Harpootlian said is a possibility. And Rutherford had some more pointed things to say, just that he didn't think there'd be another death penalty case in Richland County, and that the state seems to be going away from that. I don't know, if you got, depending on the nature of the crime, if that's true, as you and I have discussed. But it just seemed there, like you mentioned, a lot of hurdles, the possibility for this to be drawn out and cause everybody a lot more anguish for the next however many months this would have been.
I mean, it obviously probably with the COVID as well, but it already took 2 years for this to for Nathaniel Rowland to get a trial.
Right.
Since his arrest.
Gibson said he spoke to the family. They were satisfied he'll spend the rest of his natural life in prison, and he consulted them before he decided to seek life in prison if they're satisfied with all of that. So that's part of it.
In fact, I've been told that he reported today, actually, to prison, to the Department of Corrections. So he's beginning on that chapter of his life. You covered this trial for a little over a week, and you're preparing a story for us about some of the details, some of the things that we learned from what happened with the case, with the investigation, as well as there was, of course, always interesting things that happened in a courtroom during these things that don't necessarily get broadcast or published right away. What were some of the impressions that you took away? Both during the testimony, maybe some things, but also some things that, as I said, were happening in the courtroom as part of that process.
Sure. Well, a big thing that stuck with me the last couple of days was just the comments that Samantha's family said in court. It was very powerful. It was tough to listen to at times. Samantha's father, Seymour, talked about having contemplated suicide since Samantha's death. The fact that, just difficulty sleeping at night. There's kind of overwhelming guilt that he feels. Samantha had visited Drexel. I think her father said the previous weekend, had a full ride to Drexel, was supposed to visit Rutgers in New Jersey the following weekend, the weekend after the weekend that she died.
She was heading to law school.
Yeah, she was headed to law school, and she was supposed to have another law school visit that weekend. And her father convinced her not to take it because Rutgers was only offering partial scholarship, and she had a full ride to Drexel. So that's the kind of things, the what ifs that they're living with. And her boyfriend, Greg Corbishley, lives in Charleston. Just talked about, talking to her throughout that day before she disappeared. She was asking him repeatedly to come visit. They'd already planned to visit in Charleston that weekend, so he said no, he was going to wait. And he's talked about having night terrors and waking up down the hallway from his bedroom, fielding text messages and calls from friends at 3 a.m. who are scared to get in their rides and want him to stay on the phone with them until they get home safely. So it's just those sort of things that it's clear that they've been living through hell for the past 28 months and will continue, I'm sure, to live some of that.
Well, let's go ahead and go to some of the questions that we've had submitted. And again, if you have a question, you can hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and submit one. Ann Smith asks, why was Nathaniel Rowland permitted to talk with his family during the trial? That it was noted several times that during breaks or at the end of sessions each day, he would chat with his family, which some legal experts thought was a little unusual. But what was behind that?
Sure. Well, it did not escape the attention of Samantha's family either. Her father made a comment to that effect during his impact statement. Why, when his daughter is dead, do they have to watch, Roland walking around and talking to his family? And the judge addressed that directly as one of the last things he said during the trial. He said he believes in the presumption of innocence, that Roland was secured at all times. He wasn't actually walking free. He still had leg chains on. He was supervised by multiple deputies. But essentially that before he was found guilty of murder, he wasn't going to be treated as such. That was Judge Clifton Newman who said that.
Carolyn Adams asks, did Nathaniel Rowland have a criminal record? And I guess, do we have any indication that he had any sort of violent past before committing this crime?
What was said is he had no convictions. So he had not been convicted of any crimes. He, and his defense closing statement, comments that his family made, had no history of violence, nothing that would indicate that this was something he was capable of. But that's about all all we know. We know that he was a basketball player in high school, East Clarendon. He attended South Carolina State for at least some time, and his mother just talked about him being a loving and caring person. The judge made a comment to the effect of, at some point he stopped being that.
We've had a couple of questions from folks who've asked a little bit about what was his demeanor was like in the courtroom, in the sense, we've talked a little bit about what he at least said when he finally spoke, but what was he what was he like in the courtroom, and what did he seem to be like when he was around his family? Did he seem to be, a different person in a way?
It's just very reserved. Was my takeaway. He jotted notes. He removed his mask every now and then to sip water. He'd lean in and listen to things his attorneys were saying or make comments to them. But there are no physical reactions to testimony for the most part that I could tell. No shaking his head, no nothing that would catch anybody's attention. And that might have been, by design. He kind of sat there and stared straight forward. When he was talking with his family, it was kind of the same way, kind of reserved, just quietly chatting in the corner. And so there wasn't a whole lot of indication as to what he was thinking, if anything. It helped me. The past couple of days, I've had to rewatch some testimony that's on YouTube, and they, Court TV obviously shows his face and his eyes a little closer, and so you can see every now and then he's looking around the courtroom to watch who's speaking or do different things, but it's still a difficult read, especially with his mask on.
One of the things, again, we've had a couple of questions to this effect, and this is a detail that we haven't talked about in this case, which is when Samantha Josephson was in the car. Her apartment was on Main Street, which is to the north of where 5 Points, but the car traveled south. There were her boyfriend and several friends had had an app where you could track a phone, and were tracking as she was going obviously the opposite direction of where she lived. There was some thought about why they didn't try to call police at that point, that kind of thing. Talk a little bit about what happened that night and how they reacted, and when did they finally reach out to police, and what excuse they gave, and what did they say why they didn't call right away?
Sure. Well, initially, they just thought possibly the most simple explanation was true, that she left her phone in an Uber by mistake. That she had, decided to go to a friend's house or something. Their mind, I don't think, immediately went to the worst place. But the boyfriend did follow up. He called her friends. They both talked about why this was happening. But as far as why they didn't call the police immediately, they said, they thought it was required 24 hours before they could file a missing persons report. So they kind of went on their own investigation. So the following, I guess, that night they went to where her phone tracked. Her roommates did. Went to where her phone had last tracked. Her boyfriend drove up. The next morning, when they still hadn't heard from her, they retraced. Numerous times they went back to where her phone last pinged on the Find My Friends app in the Rosewood area. They knocked on doors. They talked to people out there and asked if they'd seen anything. And it was at that point, at some point after that, where they contacted police and were told, no, you don't need to wait. You don't need to wait 24 hours. We'll open this case. And the police got involved, but really they did their own digging. They called. Samantha was supposed to go to work. She worked as a waitress at Liberty in the Vista. She was supposed to go to work later that morning. Her roommate said her apartment door was still open the same way it had been when she left the previous night, and her work shoes were outside the door. So eventually they became really concerned and realized this might not just be a case of her leaving her phone in somebody's car.
Well, I know it was an emotional week. I know it was a tough assignment, but as well as obviously a story that a lot of people wanted to know, and a lot of people wanted to understand more about what happened in this case. One of the things I think that has come away from all of this is that I think many of us who now get into ride shares or get into Ubers and Lyfts ask the driver ahead of time who you were here to pick up, so that you can instantly match, as well as, of course, some of the other safety measures that have been taken, including a new law in South Carolina that requires Uber and Lyft drivers to put their license tags in the front, so you can identify those and match them up with the person you are supposed to be riding with on the app. as well. So obviously some things have come out of this in addition to what happened this week with the trial. Stephen, I want to say thanks for being with us today. Thanks for all your good coverage, and we're looking forward to your story following up this trial coming out a little later on this week. Remember that you can send Stephen questions, comments to that email address that we've included in the chat. Also, remember that this webcast, that this event will be emailed to you if you registered for this event, but also will be on our YouTube page, on the Post and Courier's web YouTube page soon, for anyone who might have missed it and wanted to catch up with this. I also just always take this time to remind you that the great journalism that Stephen has been doing in covering this trial comes with the help of your subscriptions. We are running a sale right now, $4 for 4 months. Also, if you run into someone from the Post and Courier Columbia team, we all have cards that can get you a half off of an annual subscription, so you can continue to read the journalism, the impactful journalism that we do each day. And also feel free to sign up for any of our newsletters. We've obviously been promoting a lot of the coverage through our newsletters, as well as breaking news alerts on all of that. So I want to thank everyone who's already subscribed to those things to do that, and I want to be able to thank you later. And of course, follow all of our coverage here at the Post and Courier at postandcourier.com, and then specifically if you want news from Columbia, it's postandcourier.com/Columbia. Thank you for joining us today, and obviously be safe and have a good week, everyone.
Post and Courier, being here in Columbia, it's our goal to really help you understand the issues. The most important thing to me as a journalist is getting at those stories that no one else is going to tell and looking out for the people in the community where I live. Investing in a local news subscription is what allows our reporters to spend the time telling the stories that will have the most impact on your life.